I watched my parents hand over the $30,000 they had promised for my dream wedding to bail my golden child brother out of his third DUI. That was the day I finally walked away. 5 years later, they were standing on my porch begging for a dime. Here's why I slammed the door. In the Mitchell household, there was an unspoken rule that dictated every holiday, every financial decision, and every emotional bandwidth my parents had. Connor comes first. I was 2 years older than Connor, but you would never know it by the way we were treated. My parents, Susan and Robert, weren't wealthy by any stretch of the imagination. My dad worked as a regional manager for a logistics company, and my mum was a dental hygienist. We lived in a modest 4-bedroom house in the Oak Ridge Hills subdivision, a neighborhood where people cared entirely too much about keeping up appearances. And to my parents, Connor was their ultimate trophy. Connor was born premature, and my mother always blamed that for his delicate nature, a nature that somehow translated into him getting away with absolute murder. By the time he was 10, he was a holy terror who knew exactly how to manipulate my parents' guilt. By the time he was 16, he was a full-blown liability. While I was spending my high school years working double shifts at Miller's Diner to afford a used Honda Civic so I could drive myself to community college, Connor was being handed the keys to a brand new Jeep Wrangler for getting a solid C average. When I confronted my dad about the blatant discrepancy, his response was always the same tired script. "Morgan, you're so strong and independent. You don't need our help. Connor is different. He needs a little more guidance." Guidance in their vocabulary meant throwing money at his mistakes so the neighbors wouldn't gossip. When Connor was caught vandalizing the bleachers at Centisi, Jude's private school they could barely afford but insisted he attend, they didn't punish him. They hired a high-priced lawyer, settled out of court with the school board, and bought him a new gaming computer because he was stressed from the ordeal. I learned early on that to survive in that house I had to be invisible. I became the classic blast child. I got a full scholarship to a state university, moved out at 18, and never asked them for a single dime. I put myself through a grueling master's program in finance and eventually landed a highly competitive position as a senior analyst at Henderson & Co., one of the top accounting firms in the city. I was building a life, a solid, respectable life, completely on my own. Connor, meanwhile, was failing upwards. He dropped out of 3 different colleges, claiming the professors had it out for him. He started a series of disastrous businesses, a custom sneaker company, a crypto mining operation in my parents' basement, a dropshipping scheme, each one requiring a hefty seed investment from the bank of mom and dad. Every single one went bankrupt. The real breaking point, or at least the preamble to it, started when I met Liam. Liam was everything my family wasn't: grounded, accountable, and fiercely protective of me. He was a structural engineer, a man who built things to last, which was a refreshing contrast to the constant crumbling chaos of my family. When Liam proposed to me on a rainy Tuesday evening in our cramped apartment, slipping a beautiful, modest vintage ring onto my finger, I felt the kind of happiness I didn't know I was allowed to have. I was 28, and for the first time in my life I felt entirely seen. We announced our engagement at a Sunday dinner at my parents' house. For once the spotlight shifted. My mother actually gasped, her eyes tearing up as she looked at the ring. My father poured champagne. Even Connor, who was currently between opportunities and living in their guest room, managed a half-hearted congratulatory toast before complaining about his food. Then came the shock. As my mother was clearing the plates, she placed her hand over mine. "Morgan," she said, her voice trembling with what looked like genuine emotion. "Your father and I have been talking. We know we haven't always been there financially for you the way we have for your brother. You've always been so capable. But a wedding is a father's duty to his daughter. We have $30,000 saved up in a high-yield account. We want to pay for the wedding. We want to give you the day you deserve." I stared at her, stunned. Liam squeezed my knee under the table. I looked at my dad, who nodded proudly. For a brief, naive moment, the icy resentment that had built up in my chest for 2 decades began to thaw. Maybe they did love me equally. Maybe they had finally realized the error of their ways. Maybe just this once I could be the center of their universe. "Thank you," I choked out, tears welling in my eyes. That means everything. It was the biggest mistake of my life to believe them. The next 6 months were a whirlwind of planning. With a $30,000 budget, Liam and I didn't have to scrape the bottom of the barrel. We found the perfect venue, Willow Creek Manor, a stunning restored 19th century estate with sprawling gardens and a glass conservatory for the reception. It was elegant, romantic, and exactly what I had dreamed of since I was a little girl playing dress-up. The venue required a $15,000 deposit 6 months out, which my parents transferred to me without a hitch. That initial transfer cemented my false sense of security. They were actually coming through. My mother even came dress shopping with me, weeping when I stepped out of the dressing room in an A-line lace gown. For a few shining months, I had the mother-daughter relationship I had always envied in my friends. The final $15,000 for the venue and the caterer was due exactly 4 weeks before the wedding date. The invitations had been mailed. The RSVPs were in. 120 guests, including Liam's extended family flying in from Scotland, had booked their flights and hotels. The flowers were ordered, the band was booked, and my dress was undergoing its final alterations. It was a Thursday morning, exactly 5 weeks before the wedding, when my phone rang at 6 a.m. It was my mother, Morgan. She sobbed hysterically into the receiver. "You need to come over. Now." "It's Connor. It's a disaster." My stomach plummeted. I threw on a pair of sweatpants, shook Liam awake to tell him I was going to my parents' house, and drove the 20 minutes to Oak Ridge Hills with a knot of dread tightening in my throat. When I walked through the front door, the house felt heavy, like a tomb. My mother was sitting at the kitchen table, her face buried in her hands, surrounded by crumpled tissues. My father was pacing the floor, his face pale and drawn. Connor wasn't there. "What happened?" I asked, dropping my keys on the counter. My father stopped pacing and ran a hand over his face. "Connor made a mistake, Morgan. A really bad one." The story spilled out in ugly, jagged pieces. Connor had been at a bar downtown the night before. He got completely trashed, got into an altercation with a bouncer, and decided to drive home. He blew through a red light at 60 miles an hour and T-boned a parked delivery truck. By some miracle, no one was in the truck, and Connor walked away with a few bruised ribs and a busted lip. But the police arrived. Connor was breathalyzed on the spot. He blew a .18 more than double the legal limit. It was his 3rd DUI, though the first 2 had been quietly expunged or pled down to reckless driving, thanks to expensive lawyers when he was in his early 20s. This time there was property damage, resisting arrest. He took a swing at a cop, and a history of offenses. "He's in county lockup," my mother wailed, finally looking up at me with bloodshot eyes. "They're talking about actual jail time, Morgan. Real hard time. Our baby boy." "He's 26, Mum," I said coldly, the sympathy draining out of me in an instant. "He's not a baby. He could have killed someone." "Don't be so heartless," she snapped, her grief instantly morphing into defensive anger. "He has an illness. He needs help, not judgment." "So what does this have to do with me?" I asked, though the icy dread in my stomach already knew the answer. "Why did you need me here at 6 in the morning?" My father let out a heavy sigh and sat down across from my mother. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "We spoke to a defense attorney a few hours ago. A top-tier guy. Casey Vance." "No, Casey Sterling. He's the best in the state for these kinds of cases. He thinks he can keep Connor out of state prison and get him into a residential rehab facility instead." "Okay," I said slowly. And his retainer is $25,000, my dad mumbled to the floor. "Plus the restitution for the delivery truck. The impound fees. We have to bail him out today." The silence in the kitchen stretched so thin it felt like a wire about to snap and take my head off. I stared at them. I looked at the granite countertops, the stainless steel appliances, the framed family portrait on the wall where Connor was standing front and center, smiling that arrogant, bulletproof smile. "No," I whispered. "No, you didn't." "Morgan, sweetheart, please understand," my mother pleaded, reaching across the table. I recoiled violently, pulling my hands back against my chest. "We don't have that kind of liquid cash laying around. Our retirement is tied up in mutual funds that take weeks to liquidate, and the penalties." "You took the wedding money," I said, my voice eerily calm. The rage wasn't hot. It was absolute zero. "We had to," my father suddenly shouted, slamming his hand on the table. "He's your brother. This is his life we're talking about. If he gets a felony conviction, his life is over. Your wedding is just a party, Morgan. It's one day. You can just push it back or get married at the courthouse. Liam will understand. Just a party." The words echoed in the kitchen. "The final payments are due next week," I said mechanically. "The caterer, the venue, the florist. I signed contracts based on the money you promised me. If I default, I am liable for thousands of dollars in breach of contract. Guests have non-refundable flights." "Well, you make good money at Henderson & Co." My mother shot back, suddenly aggressive. "Take out a loan. Use a credit card. You and Liam have good credit. Connor is sitting in a jail cell. How can you be so selfish right now?" Selfish? I looked at the two people who brought me into this world. I saw the desperate, pathological enabling in my mother's eyes, and the weak, complicit cowardice in my father's. They didn't see me as a daughter whose heart was breaking. They saw me as a resource to be plundered to save their precious son, just as I had always been. The illusion of the last 6 months shattered entirely. They never intended to put me first. The money was only ever mine until Connor needed it. I stood up. I didn't yell. I didn't scream or throw anything, though every cell in my body wanted to tear that kitchen apart. "I am not taking out a loan," I said, my voice steady though my hands were shaking violently. "I am not going into debt to finance a party, because you decided to fund a criminal's legal defense. You stole from me. We didn't steal from you, it was our money," my father argued. "Money you promised me. Money I built legally binding contracts upon." I took a deep breath. "Keep the money. Bail him out. I am another lawyer to get him out of the consequences he deserves." "Morgan, please don't be like this," my mother cried, fake tears returning. "I'm not being like anything," I replied, turning toward the door. "But I want you to listen to me very carefully. You have chosen him again, and that's fine. But it's the last time." "What does that mean?" my dad asked, standing up. "It means I'm done," I said, looking over my shoulder at them one last time. "Don't come to the courthouse. Don't call me. Don't email me. As of right now, I don't have a family." I walked out of the house, got into my car, and drove away. I pulled over 2 blocks down the street and finally broke down, screaming and sobbing into the steering wheel until my throat was raw. When I finally pulled myself together, I called Liam. He didn't hesitate. He didn't complain about the lost deposits or the chaotic change of plans. He just said, "Come home, Morgan. Morgan, I've got you." Over the next 3 days, I spent hours on the phone. I cancelled the caterer, losing the deposit. I cancelled the florist. I sent out a mass email to all 120 guests, explaining with brutal honesty that due to an unforeseen financial betrayal by my family regarding a legal matter for my brother, the wedding at Willow Creek Manor was cancelled. I didn't cover for them. I let the Oak Ridge Hills gossip mill feast. A week later, wearing a simple white sundress, Liam and I stood in front of a judge at the municipal courthouse. Liam's best friend was the witness. It was quiet, it was tearful, and it was entirely ours. I blocked my parents' numbers. I blocked Connor. I blocked my Aunt Brenda, who tried to text me that I was destroying my mother's heart. Liam and I changed the locks on our apartment and threw ourselves into our careers. I mourned the family I never had, buried the fantasy of their love, and moved on. I thought the book was closed forever. I didn't realize that the universe was just taking a long time to write the final chapter. The 5 years that followed our courthouse wedding were the most peaceful, productive years of my life. Without the constant, suffocating gravity of my family's dysfunction dragging me down, I flourished. Liam and I bought a beautiful mid-century modern home in Crestview, a quiet, leafy suburb safely 25 miles away from Oak Ridge Hills. I was promoted to a director-level position at Henderson & Company, and Liam successfully launched his own boutique structural engineering firm. We adopted a golden retriever named Barnes, took vacations to Italy and Japan, and built a sanctuary of our own. I never looked back. I held the line of no contact with military precision. Any letters sent to our address went straight into the shredder. If a stray voicemail from an unknown number turned out to be my mother, I deleted it the second I heard her breathless, dramatic sigh. But Oak Ridge Hills was a small enough ecosystem that gossip eventually filtered its way to me. You can't hide a burning building, especially when the arsonist is your own son. According to snippets I heard from an old high school friend, and later confirmed by a desperate, rambling email my Aunt Brenda sent to my professional work address, Connor's DUI had been just the tip of the iceberg. The $25,000 my parents stole from my wedding fund had, predictably, bought Connor his freedom. Attorney Casey Sterling had worked his expensive magic, keeping Connor out of a state penitentiary and placing him in Serenity Pines, a luxury resort-style rehab facility in the mountains. Connor lasted exactly 3 weeks before he was kicked out for smuggling in vodka in a mouthwash bottle and propositioning one of the nursing staff. With his legal probation hanging by a thread, my parents did what they always did. They doubled down. They blamed the rehab facility. They blamed the local police. They blamed the bartender who overserved him. But Connor was escalating. A year after my wedding, Connor decided he was destined to be a real estate mogul. He launched a company called Apex Horizon Holdings. It was a flimsy house of cards, essentially a localized Ponzi scheme wrapped in flashy Instagram posts of rented sports cars and leased Rolexes. He convinced my parents' country club friends, local business owners, and, most devastatingly, my parents themselves, to invest in guaranteed return property flips. He didn't flip a single property. He used the capital to fund his lavish lifestyle, paying off early investors with the money from new ones. When the well ran dry, the SEC and the local district attorney started asking questions. My parents, utterly blinded by their lifelong delusion that Connor was just a misunderstood genius, threw themselves onto the financial grenade to protect him. When a furious investor threatened to go to the police and file federal wire fraud charges, my father, Robert, panicked. He liquidated his entire 401k, taking the massive tax penalties on the chin to pay the man off quietly. But it wasn't enough. The debts were astronomical. So Connor, showing the absolute void of empathy he had been raised to possess, committed his ultimate masterpiece. He convinced my father that he had secured a massive buyout from a venture capitalist firm in Chicago, but he needed short-term liquidity to finalize the legal paperwork. He pushed some documents in front of my father on a Tuesday night. My dad, desperate for the nightmare to be over and for his son to be the success story he always promised, signed them without having a lawyer review them. They weren't venture capitalist papers. Connor had forged additional documents, utilizing my father's signature as a co-signer, to take out a predatory high-interest secondary mortgage on the Oak Ridge Hills house, stripping out the remaining $180,000 of equity my parents had spent 30 years building. 2 days later, the money was wired to an offshore account. Connor packed his bags, drove his leased Audi to the airport, and vanished. The last anyone heard, he was somewhere in Boca Raton, living under a slightly altered name. He left my parents with nothing but a crumbling facade, a stack of subpoenas, and a balloon payment they could never dream of affording. The bank initiated foreclosure proceedings 6 months later. I watched this train wreck from a distance, feeling a bizarre mixture of profound sadness and absolute icy vindication. I didn't reach out. I didn't gloat. I simply poured a glass of wine, handed Liam his whiskey, and we toasted the protective power of closed doors. I thought the collapse of their empire would keep them too busy to bother with me. I underestimated the sheer audacity of desperate people. It was late November, a bitter, sleet-filled Thursday evening. Liam was out of town at a conference in Denver, and I was home alone, curled up on the couch reading financial reports with Barnes sleeping heavily on my feet. At 8:45 p.m. the doorbell rang. Barnes barked, his tail thumping against the hardwood floor. I wasn't expecting anyone. I walked to the foyer and checked the security camera monitor mounted on the wall. My breath hitched, catching painfully in my throat. Standing on my porch, shivering under the amber glow of the patio light, were my parents. They looked unrecognizable. The 5 years had aged them 20. My father, once a proud, posture-perfect executive, looked hollowed out and frail, his winter coat hanging loosely off his shoulders. My mother's perfectly highlighted hair was completely gray and visibly thinning. At their feet sat 2 cheap, scuffed suitcases and a garbage bag filled with what looked like winter boots and coats. They looked like refugees. A surge of panic gripped me. My hand hovered over the security panel. I could just not answer. I could call the police and have them trespass. But as I watched my mother rub her arms against the freezing sleet, a cold, hard curiosity washed over me. I needed to look them in the eye. I needed to see the end of the story. And Vision, I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the heavy mahogany door open, keeping the chain engaged. The freezing air whipped into the warm foyer. Morgan, my mother gasped, her eyes welling with immediate tears. Oh, thank God, you're home. Not there. What are you doing here? I asked, my voice devoid of any warmth. My father stepped forward, his eyes darting nervously around the affluent neighborhood. Morgan, please, let us in. It's freezing out here. We just need to come inside and talk. There is nothing to talk about, I said, staring at the garbage bag at his feet. You have no right to show up at my home. We didn't have a choice. My mother sobbed, leaning heavily against the brick siding. The bank, the sheriffs came today, Morgan. They locked us out. They took the house. We have nowhere to go. We've been sleeping in your father's car for 2 days, but the transmission blew on the highway, and we had to take an Uber here. Where's Connor? I asked. The question hung in the freezing air like a physical blow. My father flinched. He looked down at his ruined shoes. We don't know. He had some business trouble. He had to relocate. He's not answering his phone. Business trouble, I repeated, letting out a dry, humorless laugh. He robbed you blind. He stole your equity, committed mortgage fraud, and left you to freeze in a broken-down car. Is that about right? They both stared at me, horrified that I knew. He's sick, Morgan, my mother whimpered automatically, the same tired script still programmed into her brain even as she stood homeless on my porch. He got mixed up with the wrong people. He didn't mean to hurt us. You are incredible, I whispered, shaking my head in pure awe of their delusion. You are standing here utterly destroyed by your son, and you're still making excuses for him. Morgan, please, my father begged, his voice cracking. I know we messed up. I know the wedding. I know what we did was wrong. But we are your parents. We are family. We just need to stay in your guest room for a few months. Just until we get back on our feet. We can help around the house. I can do landscaping. I looked at my father. I looked at the man who had sat at his kitchen table and told me my wedding was just a party. The man who had taken the money promised to me and handed it over to bail out a drunk driver. I don't have a guest room for you, I said steadily. Morgan, look at this house. My mother cried, her desperation turning into that familiar, entitled anger. You have plenty of space. You make 6 figures. You can afford to help us. Are you really going to let your own mother and father freeze on the streets over an old grudge? It's not a grudge, Mom, I said, looking her dead in the eyes. It's a boundary. You made your choice 5 years ago. You chose him. You invested every ounce of your money, your love, and your loyalty into Connor. You are currently experiencing the return on your investment. You selfish, ungrateful. My mother started to spit, her face twisting into an ugly mask of rage. Stop, I cut her off sharply. Do not speak to me like that on my property. My father put a hand on her arm to silence her. Morgan, what are we supposed to do? We have negative $30 in our checking account. We have nothing. You're strong and independent, I said, quoting his exact words back to him with chilling precision. You don't need my help. You just need a little more guidance. Go to a shelter, call Aunt Brenda, or call the cops on Connor and have him extradited to pay for what he did to you. We can't send our boy to prison. My mother shrieked. Then freeze, I said softly. I reached forward and unhooked the chain. For a second, my father's eyes lit up with hope, thinking I was opening the door to let them in. Instead, I grabbed the heavy brass handle and looked at them one last time. Goodbye. Do not ever come back here. If you do, I will have you arrested for trespassing. Morgan, no! Mars! Morgan, my mother screamed. I slammed the heavy door shut, the sound echoing through the quiet house like a gunshot. I threw the deadbolt. I locked the handle. I stood in the foyer, my heart hammering against my ribs, listening to my mother wailing on the other side of the wood, her fists banging against the door. Barnes trotted over, whining softly, and nudged my hand with his cold nose. I sank to the floor, wrapping my arms around the dog, and let out a long, shuddering breath. I didn't cry. I didn't feel guilty. I felt an overwhelming, profound sense of relief. The infection was finally completely cut out. 10 minutes later, the banging stopped. I checked the cameras. They were dragging their suitcases down the long, paved driveway, disappearing into the dark, sleet-covered street. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a fresh cup of tea, and texted Liam that I loved him. Karma isn't always a cosmic mystery. Sometimes it's just the natural consequence of terrible choices coming home to roost. And sometimes you get the absolute privilege of shutting the door in its face. Toxic family dynamics thrive in silence, but you don't have to set yourself on fire to keep them warm. If my story resonated with you, or if you've had to walk away from a golden child situation, let me know in the comments. Please like, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel for more true stories of surviving family trauma.